Hey Jamie, welcome to another episode. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Brenton. Yeah, going really well. I hope you're well.
I'm doing great, thank you. Wanted to
That's good.
cover a training with you for the next 15 or 20 minutes because I think it'll be really insightful and helpful for firm owners who are on this journey of building a business that runs without them, implementing a lot of the Wise Way projects. It's all around change management and how to approach change within your business. I've got a specific scenario where we focused a firm that was setting budgets with their team, never set budgets with their team before, and they came up against quite a bit of resistance. So I want to hone in on that particular subject. But just for general context, for firm owners who are going
Mm,
on this journey of changing, lots of things within their business in order to get it to a place where it can ultimately run without them, wherever they are on that
mm.
journey right now, how do you encourage them to approach the change with their team and with different stakeholders in the firm?
Yeah, well, change management has to be delivered with leadership. So, the first barrier to growth is essentially leadership. But to delve in under that, how to implement change, the key word would be trust. So, essentially, when trust is high amongst people, change can occur fast. And, even if people want to do a deep dive into it, there's a great book called The Speed of Trust. It's actually written by Dr. Stephen Covey's son, and his name is actually Stephen as well. I think he had 11 kids. So essentially, what the book covers is that change management, and it can be fast when trust is high. But when trust is low, change will be slow. So to sort of give a context to this and, the events and the consulting and coaching and mentoring that we do, it really comes down to trust. And when the trust is high, we can get firms to change fast.
Mhm.
So that's really sort of, to give the context. And the other thing I'd probably refer to is I've always loved the quote by Albert Einstein. He says, if you've got a problem, you'd spend, in terms of an hour, you spend 55 minutes, looking at the problem and 5 minutes looking at the solution. So that sort of give you the context around change management and what it takes in terms of the trust. Yeah, the level of trust. Mm.
So I think it'll be helpful to pull out this scenario that we faced with a particular firm in the last couple of weeks so we
Mm.
can apply what you've just mentioned there to this process and how it
Mm.
looks within a sort of day-to-day context of, building the firm. So we had a
Mm.
firm who had never set budgets with their team before, and that's team both
That's right.
locally and offshore. And when they had, gone about setting these budgets, they got quite a bit of resistance from the team. And even were using the words that the team were fearful and, were really quite
Mm.
concerned around it. So
Yeah.
walk me through what you walked them through, because I think this would be very helpful for most firm owners who haven't set budgets or haven't quite nailed it and are getting that
Yeah.
resistance from their team.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, in terms of that particular case, setting budgets or timeframes for jobs is relatively standard worldwide. It wouldn't matter what industry you're in, all jobs, all tasks, whether in hospitality, food has to be delivered, doesn't it, in a in a certain time frame, or
Mm.
you'll lose your customers. In construction, jobs have to be done in a certain time. Otherwise, you'll overrun the jobs and there'll be variations. So the point is, I think the particular firm was looking at the symptoms and not the problem. And often you can address the symptoms and sort of have simple workarounds and then say, well, if you don't have budgets, well, let's just look at how many jobs we need to get out.
Mhm.
Even if you look at that case, it still comes back to time. It still comes back to deadlines. It doesn't matter how you look at it. So I think in this particular case where, the staff, the team members, when their budgets were introduced, it gave a red flag to them. And anytime they said the word budgets, it was just fear. It just raised fear. And so what happened, sort of, Brenton, was, as I said, you sort of had to dig deeper. Well, why were they fearing the budgets? What was it, because they thought they'd get into trouble if they went over budget? The answer would be yes. But then you've got to sort of dig deeper. Well, why are they fearing that? And so, the important sort of thing in the consultancy or what the mentoring and coaching would bring is what I'd sort of come back to Dr. Stephen Covey's. I think it's habit 5, but first seek to understand before being understood. So in that sense, it would have been very important to have one-on-ones with the staff members and essentially at the core of it, Brenton, just listen, just simply listen and listen without replying and ask questions. Well, why don't you like budgets? Why do you fear them? But don't necessarily have an answer. And with these topic communications, particularly when the trust is particularly low and the fear is high, the way that you go about it is like really important. Dr. Covey even says in his book that body language is around 60% of the communication, sound is about 30, and words are about 10%. And the other thing is when you're communicating people with these particular issues with change management, the key is to listen with your eyes and with your heart, as they say. So it's important that you diagnose before you prescribe with these situations, particularly around change management and when there's fear. There's a great quote that I'll see that, the deepest hunger of the human heart is to be understood. So whenever you sort of come across these symptoms of fear of change, it's just so important that empathetic listening is applied. And as I said earlier, like not even listening with a reply. And often Dr. Covey says not with what he calls an autobiographical reply. And what he means by that is say, well, oh yeah, I had that situation and that's how I felt. He
Mm.
says, don't even go down that path, which is sort of a deeper level of psychology when you're trying to do change management. But it's essentially when you really step into, as they say, the Indian moccasins. If you can understand why people are fearful, then you'll get to the root of the problem. And another way to analyze this, Brendan, is in the conversation around these change management topics or fear of the budgets, consider how much you talk versus they talk.
Mhm.
So in these conversations, you should be talking maybe 5% of the time and just asking questions, and you should be listening 95% of the time.
I think
And
something that's important that
mm,
shouldn't be overlooked here as well is that it's a conversation. Because I think,
mm,
to your point before about how messages are received and
mm.
translated, we often can fall into the trap of just firing off emails on the topic, and then you
Oh,
just end up in an email back and forward,
yes,
which
you're
doesn't
absolutely
serve
right.
anyone.
Yeah, look, emails with these type of change management issues is just an absolute no-no. Absolute rule that you shouldn't go there with email. It needs to be in face-to-face like this. So, if it's in your office, you'd obviously do it in person. If it's with one of your international or offshore team members, it should at least be done like this on Zoom. And it has to be done in person, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, to really understand from an emotional point of view what the person's thinking, why they're fearful of, say, setting budgets, and just delving questions. Because, as I said earlier, like in that particular example, budgets on getting work done on time is just a universal thing. So when I heard that, I thought, oh, there's something deeper here
Yeah.
that they're fearing, that they're afraid to say potentially.
Just on to continue on from that experience where the firm owner's going, yep, okay, I get that. Can organize a meeting, can listen 95% of the time, can ask questions, won't reply. Post that meeting, what do you do with that information as the firm owner? Like, how do you take what you found then and be constructive and move forward with it?
Yeah, the important point is that each time you interact with the individual who's fearful, that you're building the emotional bank account and just listen, And there's another word for saying, like a commerce between hearts, as one chap said in this sort of topic. So the practical aspect of that is post the meetings is to make sure that it's a non-blame culture, but that'll come out of your own personal leadership. So if you dive in sort of straight away and say, you should have done this and you should have done that and that sort of thing. That's not the way. What you want to do is deposit into the emotional bank account. And the way that you do that is by micro training them,
Hmm.
right? So you don't want to micromanage, which is like, on the chat every half hour, have you done this? Have you done that? Did you do this? Did you do that? No one likes to be micromanaged. So the important thing to continue to build the emotional bank account and bring down the barriers is to micro train them on how to do tasks. Like set a guideline. The guideline is we'd like you to do this in X hours. But if they don't do it in those number of hours, then you need to work out why. And that's detailed training though. So that's just micro training and not micromanaging. And the thing is too, all team members and all staff, they love to grow in their career. They love to learn. But the thing is, if you criticize more than you encourage them, then yeah, they will go into a shell.
Mm.
Like so if you're sort of more critical of them and do more of the talking in every single interaction, then they will go inwards and they're not going to share with you like what they're thinking. And that's why creating a non-blame culture is very, very important because then they will share with you like what they're thinking. Because if you don't understand what they're thinking and why they fear budgets or they're not sharing their problems with you, then you can't fix it. A big part of the sort of cultural divide, whether it's in your own country or with offshore staff, is just not developing the relationship where they feel comfortable with you sharing their problems.
Hmm.
So if they're not sharing your problems, whether it's personal at home problems or work problems, then you need to work on the relationship even deeper, because in all relationships, that honesty of how you're feeling about what you're doing and that integrity in the communication, or another word for it is authenticity, that's the basis of a good working relationship together. But if you're going to criticize, if you're going to always talk more than the person, then you're not listening.
Yeah.
You've just got to listen to understand what it is they fear about any changes you're implementing and really diagnose before you prescribe. And that can be only done face to face. You cannot do that on emails or
Hmm.
chat and that type of thing. So,
We've covered a good bit of territory there, Jamie. So I want to wrap it up with just
mhm.
bringing it back to focus on implementation and
Mhm.
execution from what we've just covered. So, what's
Mhm.
the one thing you would like anyone listening to this to take away from this conversation that they could, keep moving forward with their
Oh,
change
yeah,
management journey?
absolutely. Well, one of the critical things I would do is at least at minimum a 1 hour one-on-one session with each of your direct reports once a week. And so you should have a set agenda to that around issues and problems and challenges that the person's facing in their career or in their current role, and then get them to open up. So, whether it's fear of budgets or fear of taking on another task, and just break down those barriers, build the relationship, let them do most of the talking. And how do you do that? Ask questions. Like, if you want to do a deep dive on the topic, get the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, an
Mhm.
absolute classic on how to build deeper relationships.
Yeah.
There's another book called The Likability Factor. So, if you're in a management role, you have to understand people and you've got to build the emotional bank account and make sure that every edge moment that you work with people, that they go away feeling positive. Imagine on average they go away feeling negative
Yeah.
about your interaction with them. Right? That's just going to drain the emotional bank account. But every moment, every opportunity you get to work together, make sure that they've left empowered, more knowledgeable, you understand them. And then as you sort of deposit into that emotional bank account, the barriers will come down and they'll actually tell you what they're thinking.
Mm. It's very
Yeah. And
powerful,
so
Jamie.
that
Yeah,
that would be the absolute sort of practical tips to today's discussion. Yeah.
I love it. And I think anyone listening to this can definitely take that one thing away and get a lot of value from that very quickly. So thank you for sharing as
Mm.
always. if you're listening to this, there's a number of different things that we discussed in this training, which we will
Mhm.
may have or will dive deeper on in other episodes of this podcast. So please do search through the previous episodes. If you can't find it, reach out to us and we will most certainly create one for you. So thanks for listening. And Jamie, thanks as always for sharing your wisdom. And we'll see everyone
Okay.
soon.
Thanks, Brenton. Bye for now.